everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. You are in the right place to learn about how you can improve your year-end fundraising campaign with some great examples from the incredible work of Earthjustice. My name is Lawrence Grodeska. I am the Director of Nonprofit Community here at Change.org, and we do have a great agenda for you today. Really excited to present some new information about fundraising in 2014, in part looking back at 2013, what happened in year-end fundraising last year. We're going to be talking about the importance of storytelling. We're going to be talking about how to feed the funnel and acquire new supporters to make the impact of your year-end campaign even greater. And we'll be wrapping up to talk a little bit about testing your campaigns in preparation for that critical year-end period. We'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end, and we'll be recording this webinar, so if you want to go back and review what we talked about, if you want to share it with your colleagues, we'll be sharing that with you after the webinar is over today. If you have questions, please feel free to share them with us in the chat window on the left-hand side of your screen, and we will be looking over those questions and getting to them at the end of the webinar. And you'll notice in the bottom left-hand corner of this agenda slide, hashtag year-end. We'll be live tweeting from @Change.org. That's our Change.org for Organizations Twitter handle. We'd love for you to join us in that conversation and share any insights or experience that you have about what makes an effective year-end fundraising campaign. So really excited to get started and very excited to have with us two incredible speakers, the first of which is Erica Gulseth. Erica is the online fundraising manager at Earthjustice. She's a fundraising professional that's been working in the nonprofit world for a long time across a number of different environmental nonprofits, small regional groups to large national organizations, and she's currently leading the online fundraising at Earthjustice, the largest public interest environmental law firm in the world. Erica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi guys, really excited to be here with Lawrence and Megan to talk about year-end fundraising at Earthjustice.
Excellent. We're really honored to have you, so thank you for taking the time to share your expertise. The other person I'm delighted to have on the call with me today is Megan Tyke, one of my favorite colleagues at Change.org. She's our Senior Client Services Manager. Megan has really an extensive background in the nonprofit space, fundraising and new supporter cultivation. She was a strategist at the nonprofit communications firm Big Duck before she came to Change.org. Before that, she ran digital engagement at the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America nonprofit. Megan, so glad to be back with you today.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. I'm so excited to talk today.
Excellent. So we've got a lot of great content lined up. We're going to get to that just in a minute. But before we get started, wanted to tell you just a little bit about Change.org. You probably know a little bit about us since you're on this webinar. You've probably heard the name, and you probably know that Change.org is the world's platform for change. It's really our mission to empower people everywhere to create the change they want to see. And right now, over 70 million people around the world have taken action on Change.org by signing a petition about a cause they care about. When I think about the collective impact that's happened because of those actions taken on our site, it's just kind of astounding to me. And we do see the impact of those passionate folks engaging with causes through our platform every day, through over 7,000 victories and counting at this point from petitions started on Change.org. Now, these people are interacting with causes of all kinds on our site, and thousands of organizations, from community groups to international NGOs like Earthjustice, are connecting with passionate supporters through our platform to build movements that make a difference. And also astounding is the collective impact that these organizations have had. Over 100 million signatures have been collected by organizations starting petitions on Change.org, which is just a real honor for us and a privilege to be a part of. And just like we empower individuals at Change.org, the other side of our mission is to empower organizations to build those movements to create change by connecting them with high-quality new supporters. We work with organizations around the world across many different causes and important causes, and the real benefit we offer is a pretty sophisticated targeting technology that connects organizations with highly qualified new supporters to cultivate into your next generation of advocates and donors. That happens via email, and now we're also excited to be able to connect you via phone to new supporters. I'll be talking about that that in a little bit. We're going to be talking about online acquisition and paid acquisition as part of year-end fundraising strategy as well. So I won't say any more about our paid services, but if you are interested in learning more about how Change.org can connect you with the right supporters for your mission, would be happy to talk to you after the webinar. I'll be sharing our contact information at the end. So please do feel free to reach out to me. And with that, I would love to turn it over to Erica from Earthjustice to talk to us a little bit about what Earthjustice does and how they approach their year-end fundraising. Erica, take it away.
Thanks, Lawrence. So Earthjustice is the premier environmental law organization. We take on big environmental fights in court, and we focus on three main areas right now. It's preserving the wilds is one of our big ones, fighting for healthy communities, and advancing clean energy and a healthy climate. And we're effective. We average more than 50 legal victories each year. We represent more than 1,000 clients and organizations in court, and that's all free of charge. So we rely on individual donors to make all of our work possible, which is why fundraising is so important to us here. And I'll talk about a little bit more about our year-end campaign and how that works. For us, year-end fundraising starts now. I put in this chart in the slide just to include a simple graphic to remind you that solicitations are just one part of the fundraising process. So in order to have a successful year-end, you need to start now to grow your email list, engage your community, and let them get to know you as an organization before year-end so they are primed to support you during that time. As a caveat in that, you should still ask your membership early so people know that your work relies on their support, so they know that you need those funds. We definitely come across that at Earthjustice where people sometimes don't know that we rely on individual support to do the work that we do. Another reason to start now is it takes time to optimize your emails and donation forms. So whatever you can test now, you'll reap huge rewards in the winter when you get more and more gifts coming through. We start at Earthjustice. We start strategizing and budgeting in the spring. We focus on growing our email list at this time through paid and unpaid efforts. And in the summer, we start to identify what issues we'll talk about at year-end, and in order to coordinate with offline efforts and throughout the organization. We have pretty much every department coordinates in our year-end efforts so we can execute it smoothly in December. A little bit more about how we execute our year-end fundraising. At Earthjustice, we do 6 emails in December. We send cultivation messages on the topic that we pick. We also coordinate with our social media posts, our homepage ads. We do a homepage hijack that we do the last 2 weeks of December. We tie in the theme with our newsletter on and offline. We do banner ads and retargeting. We coordinate with our mail program, telemarketing, our mobile texts, and pretty much anything that we can do, we tie in the theme, so everything's coordinated. And I'll show you examples of that later on. Yes.
Thanks so much, Erica. So before we dive into our planning for this year, we thought it might be great to take a look back at some of the trends that came up at the end of last year and see what lessons we learned. So first of all, multi-channel fundraising is something that you've probably been hearing a lot about, but it definitely became the norm as organizations were fundraising across email, social media, direct mail. It is now the normal way to approach your fundraising campaigns. Another great statistic is that last year was the largest year-over-year increase in donations since 2008, which is about when the recession hit. So that's great news that donations are on the up and up, and hopefully we'll see that continue to rise in 2014. Really interestingly, while overall giving did grow, online giving specifically grew 3 times as fast as overall giving. So that is definitely where the momentum is, and it's not an area that your organization can be ignoring anymore. It's where the money is. And finally, last year was really interesting as events like Giving Tuesdays started popping up. There were a lot of opportunities to really have fundraising campaigns going year-round, so you can really diversify your fundraising efforts, and you don't have to feel like all your eggs are in one basket at the end of the year. Year-end is still key and where all the money comes in, but there's other opportunities that you can be practicing your campaigns and getting your story out there. So I'm going to toss it back over to Lars to talk about storytelling.
Thanks, Megan. And we wanted to start out the best practices and some of the advice that we have about year-end fundraising with storytelling, because so much of the supporter cultivation and that donation that eventually comes into your organization happens out of the story that you tell to your supporters. So the story is something you need to think about in advance. It's something that you need to think about throughout the course of your fundraising campaign, and you need to think about it consistently. So turning it back to Megan to talk about what makes an effective story.
Great. So storytelling is really at the heart of the work that we do here at change.org. And the reason that it's important is that it gives your supporters an emotional connection to the work that your organization is doing. Stories are really useful because they can break down those complex issues that you're tackling because they create that personal connection. And with that connection, you're then motivating action among your supporters because you're showing them how one person can make a difference in someone else's story. A really important part of storytelling, especially for nonprofits, is involving your audience and making sure they understand how their support is a crucial part of the story you're telling and how their support is going to help solve that problem that you've set out together to solve. I'd love to hear a little bit from you, Erica, about how Earthjustice approaches storytelling, especially for your year-end campaign.
Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have three main buckets of work. One is preserving the wild, one is fighting for healthy communities, and one is advancing clean energy and a healthy climate. And I'll pick a year-end topic related to one of these themes. For fiscal year 13, which is last year, or sorry, I should say for calendar year 2013, it was saving the wild. And I'll talk a little bit about how I picked that storyline and how we created a theme. So here are some of the things that I'll look for when coming up with a story theme for year-end. Last year's theme was saving the wild. So I'll think about, does it tie into our mission? As a legal organization, we rely on strong laws. So we want to make sure our theme and story is framed around our legal work and our laws. I'll think, is it an issue that's timely? On December 28th, it was the 40th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act, and this is a law that we use regularly in our work, and we have for 40 years. So it's definitely timely. But is it urgent? I'll try to find fights that are going on now. Not only did we have emergency casework that popped up in the fall related to endangered species, but we also saw brutal attacks on Capitol Hill last summer and fall that tied into really nicely with the anniversary of that law. And then I look at what do our members care about and give to. In this messaging story, I highlighted a lot of our current casework. Related, in this case, it was manatees, wolves, grizzly bears, and whales. And these were cases that I'd already told the story of these fights throughout the fall, and they resonated with our donors. So I didn't have to focus on each individual fight because they already had that background. I knew they performed well, people were emotionally tied to them, and I could weave this work throughout the storyline without focusing on one too in-depth. And then, yeah. Thanks, Megan.
Great. No, that's a really great guideline to be following there. So once you do land on the story that you want to tell, you want to start thinking about how you're going to integrate it across all the channels that you're communicating on. So likely your organization is on email, social media, you might have a text messaging program, you hopefully have a website, you might have a direct mail program, and you want to make sure that the story that you're telling is consistent across all of those platforms. So that way, no matter where a supporter encounters that story, they're hearing the same thing. You might have heard of the rule of sevens. It's a popular rule in the for-profit marketing world, which is that somebody needs to hear something 7 times or see it before it finally sinks in. It's a really noisy world, and so when you feel like you're repeating that story across those platforms, that's probably about the time that you're finally reaching people. They're finally hearing it and making that connection with your organization. So Erica, I know Earthjustice is on a whole lot of platforms. Can you talk a little bit about how you take that story and then use it across those different channels?
Yes. So I'll walk through a few examples of how we integrated the storyline throughout our mail and online programs. This first example is how we weave the story on the homepage. We've recently done a website redesign, so it looks a lot different now, but this was winter. And we had a focus on the Endangered Species Act 40th anniversary. We had a huge feature on that, and then we tied our homepage ad. So on the right-hand side, you'll see our homepage ad related to the storyline as well. This is our homepage and website hijack during that time. We roll this out the last 2 weeks of the year. We see a huge number of gifts coming here. And because of these large volumes at year end, we're able to test these hijacks as well. And I'll talk about some of the tests of different variations that we did later on in this webinar. But this is how we highlighted it. This pops up whenever someone goes to the website for the first time during this, this time period. On the left hand here is how we integrated the storyline into our social media work. So this is a Facebook post on the left. On the right is our online newsletter. This comes out once a month, and we tied, as you can see, the top story is about the Endangered Species Act 40th anniversary, and right underneath that is an ad that's tied into our year-end efforts. So we integrated it online and offline. Here is one of our emails. So as I mentioned earlier, Earthjustice sends 6 emails tied to this story arc in December. I personally recommend sending at least 3 to 7 during this time. Everyone's sending out emails, and you'll just get lost in the shuffle. The first message for us tends to be a bit on the longer side. We set the story up for a framework, so it tends to be longer. And then by the end, we condense the story. It's still the same message, but it's a lot more condensed. And by the end of the month, it's just really last chance. And I definitely recommend sending an appeal out if you don't already on December 30th and 31st. For Earthjustice, we raised more than 10% of our funds these last 2 days, so we don't want to miss out on that. Here is how we integrated this message in the mail. On the left is our magazine that goes to every donor. And this feature is on the 40th anniversary of the Endangered Species Act. On the right is an offline appeal that's tied into the same message that we use online. And this is part of the reason why we want to start early as well, just because the lead-up time for offline efforts is a lot longer than online. So if you can coordinate, that's best. And we've done a lot of testing about coordinating where we've segmented people with emails and we sent them the same message. And then some people we didn't, and we did see a lift in the mail as well as overall. So you definitely want to coordinate if you can. And don't forget to thank your donors and activists. Your members are partners in your work. You can't do your work without them. So thank them early and often, and definitely follow up with them regularly on the issues that they care about. These are examples of thank yous that we sent last year. On the left side is an online thank you that we sent after the campaign wrapped. And on the right-hand side is a thank you that we sent in the mail. And it's all tied to this same work.
I love that example. Thanks so much, Erica. The thank you is definitely a key part of the donation process there, so I love that you highlighted that. So when it comes to storytelling, it's a lot like a muscle. It's not something that you can wake up in November and all of a sudden tell a great story for your year-end campaign. It's really important that you're thinking about storytelling in all of the work that you're doing all year round and promoting a culture within your organization where people understand what makes a good story and that they understand your organization's story and how to tell it. So a great way to do that is by developing a strategy. Goals are really important to make sure that, first of all, they're measurable so that you know whether the story you're telling has been a success or not, because otherwise you won't know how to improve it. Identifying your target audience is crucial so that you can tailor your story to those different audiences and that you're really making a great point that they're going to connect with. And finally, thinking about where you're going to be telling your story. Email is definitely one of the most important tools for storytelling. It gives you the most space to really talk about the work that you're doing. So make sure you know where that story is going to be told. And since you do have those measurable goals already, at the end of the campaign, make sure you're evaluating the impact of your story. What was achieved from this story? Was it a success? And how are ways that we can improve the way that we're telling it to make it even better next time?
Excellent. So some great information about storytelling and how to incorporate that and prepare yourself to incorporate that into your year-end campaign. We're going to shift focus now into preparing your list and growing your list to make sure that your year-end campaign leads to the most returns possible. Before we do that, though, I just want to remind people that we're taking questions in the chat window. Some great questions have already come in. We're going to be getting into some more detail on the homepage hijack later in the webinar, so stay tuned for that. The person that asked that question, and we'll have plenty of time, so please do enter your questions into that chat window. So as far as feeding the funnel and acquisition, the idea here is that since most of your donations come in at the end of the year, it's important to be as ready as possible and have as many people poised to give as you can so that critical end-of-year period leads to the most results. So we're going to talk about why that's important and how to do it, some ideas about growing your list, and a little bit about multi-channel and some paid acquisition you can do. To get us started, I'm going to turn it back to Megan.
Great, thanks, because you definitely want to have people on your list when you're asking to raise money. Otherwise, there's going to be no money coming in. So that's why feeding the funnel is important. And the numbers really say it all. If you look at the M&R benchmarks report from last year, there's two crucial numbers to take a look at. First is response rates. So that's the number of people who click on your email and donate. They report that it was a 0.07% last year. That's pretty small, and you want to make sure that you have enough people so that you're getting a response from the folks on your list. Conversely, list churn is up. So the average is that your list is going to churn through about 13% each year. That means that if you're not replacing that 13%, then your list is actually shrinking. Just by replacing 13%, you're staying about even. So if you want to be growing, you need to be thinking about ways to get new people on your list. And also, it's really important to remember that donations aren't often the first touch that a supporter has with your organization. Take that time to cultivate them, and that takes a lot of time. So you want to be starting early, like yesterday probably, and work them up that ladder of engagement so that by the time year-end fundraising rolls around, they're primed, they're excited, they're ready to give, they know where their money's going, and they're a great, reliable donor for years to come. So what are some ways that you can grow your list, keeping that 13% churn number in mind? Well, here's a couple of ways. First of all, on your website, you should always have a sign up for your email on your home page so that nobody has to click through in order to sign up. Just have a box where they can drop their email and a zip code and start receiving your newsletter. Erica is also going to talk more about the homepage hijack, which is essentially a pop-up on the window so that when someone comes to your website, they see a pop-up and they're prompted to give you their email address. 3 other channels. First is social media. And that's something that people are still finessing and figuring out some strategies, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Advocacy campaigns and petitions are something that we do a lot of here at change.org, and they're a great way to tell a story and also get some new folks on your list by reaching a new audience with a legislative action or whatever the case may be. By getting them excited about taking part in that action, they'll then become more likely to become advocates for you down the road. Finally, we'll also talk a little bit about acquisition in just a minute and hear a little bit from Erica about the Earthjustice acquisition. So let's talk a little bit about social media, which is kind of the holy grail. It's not the easiest thing in the world to turn a follow into an email, but it's also not impossible, and here are a couple ways that you can do it. First of all, if you're not asking, that's the first place to start. If you haven't been posting links on your Facebook page or on Twitter asking people to sign up for your email list, then that's a lost opportunity. You never know what will happen when you ask nicely. So that's a great place to start. If you are a little more tech savvy, you could be adding custom tabs to your Facebook page. There's a couple ways you can do this. One, you could add your email sign-up page directly from your home page. You could also embed a petition, maybe an advocacy action that you're running. And you can also finally embed a donation page so that people can donate directly from your Facebook page. There's also paid advertisements on Facebook and Twitter. An important tip about those is to make sure that you're creating landing pages for each of those networks so that you know where people are finding you from. And that's a great way to get new email addresses as well as to get more traction on your social media pages. So Earthjustice has a really great social media program. And Erica, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you guys sort of convert people from social media to email.
Great. So here are two examples of how we convert emails and donor conversion on Facebook. We have 183,000 followers on Facebook right now. One of these examples is an unpaid effort and one is a paid effort, just so you can see some of the things that you can do on Facebook. On the left side is an unpaid effort. It's a post to our current followers. So it's a post to about 180,000 people. This is an action alert that we had on our website. And through this effort, we got 1,400 new individuals onto our email list. I would say that's pretty high for us, but because this action really resonated with people, but we'll on average get about 700 or 800 on an action alert that we post. We don't do them often, but when we do, it does help convert people to our list. And on the right-hand side, this is a paid ad on Facebook. And for this, we do a lot more targeting to make sure that we get a positive return on investment. And some examples of who we might target that has worked well for us that you might want to try is we've targeted individuals who have clicked through on our solicitations, our email solicitations, but did not donate. We will target lapsed donors that we'd like to reactivate, and just different things to keep in mind that you don't want to go too broad when you're paying for something because it is expensive. But it's definitely worthwhile to test into and try out some of those tactics.
Oops. Thanks, Erica. And wanted to wrap up this section talking a little bit about paid acquisition. Paid acquisition is a really important part of the year-end strategy for a lot of nonprofits, partly because it's a really reliable way to grow your list and prepare for more donations at the end of the year. Our clients that work with us on paid acquisition through our paid services see some incredible success acquiring new donor leads from change.org. So I wanted to share some things that we share with our clients to think about as they prepare for acquisition in the build-up to year-end. First, it's really critical to understand not only the upfront cost in investing in acquisition, but the returns that you can expect on that investment, and to define what success looks like for your organization. If you're clear about your internal goals for acquisition up front, it's going to help you be that much more successful in achieving the goals that you set. You can only be successful in achieving the goals that you measure, because if you're not measuring them, you don't know if you're hitting them. So with acquisition in particular, you can really do a great job of forecasting what kind of return you can expect on your investment. And as you enter into your acquisition contract with a vendor like change.org, you want to be prepared for, especially through your CRM, to welcome those new leads. As Megan mentioned, tagging the source for your new leads in your CRM, making sure that's all set up so you can be tracking that ROI over time. It also means setting up your onboarding series for new supporters ahead of time so that you can welcome them immediately to your list. And as new supporters come to you, you welcome them and get them on board and introduced to your organization as quickly as possible to keep the returns as high as possible. The longer you wait to welcome a new supporter to your list, the more likely they are to forget about you. So setting that up ahead of time in your CRM is really important. You want to make sure that your story is consistent, and so this is something that Erica talked about at great length as far as the different channels that they use, Earthjustice use when sharing their year-end campaign and the donation asks. It's also important when you're acquiring new supporters through acquisition. Tell the same story through your acquisition campaign that you do through the end of the year, and that's going to lead to more likelihood of the donor understanding the value of them giving to your organization over time, if they see a consistent story and the consistent impact of their donation to your organization. Another, I think, point that's come up that I just wanted to emphasize again is don't limit yourself to just one channel. There's been some exciting changes in how organizations and nonprofits are raising funds, and as Megan mentioned, multi-channel really is the new norm. And increasingly, nonprofits are turning to phone fundraising as a way to boost year-end strategy and add an additional touch point for new supporters to get them to encourage them to donate. Getting a potential donor on the phone can be an excellent way to share your story. Some donors or potential donors might prefer to learn about you through email or direct mail, but some really do want to hear from you via phone. And along those lines, we're really excited to announce that we just launched a new opportunity for your organization to connect with new supporters via phone through our sponsored campaign product. Now you can recruit permission-based and issue-aligned new supporters, complete with phone number, in addition to email, and in some cases even address too. It's something that we've seen great success with globally. Some of our clients in the UK and in Spain and Australia have been doing this kind of work for some time, and we're really excited to roll it out to the U.S. and to nonprofits that are experimenting with telephone fundraising. So if you'd like to learn more about that, please feel free to follow up with me after the webinar. Finally, as far as acquisition is concerned, we've heard it said in a few different contexts now, but start early. Whether it is adding people to your list to get them involved in your organization and aligned with your mission and cultivated through your storytelling, or if it's getting them primed around a specific campaign, it needs to happen now. So think about that with your acquisition. And Erica, would love to hear more about how Earthjustice has incorporated acquisition over the last couple of years, because I know that you do a fair amount of it and it's led to some really great returns.
Great. So here's one of our acquisition efforts on change.org. As Lawrence mentioned, we grow our list on issues that we know we'll be messaging on in the coming year, so we aren't pulling someone in on an issue that we aren't working on actively. At Earthjustice, we track every single effort that we do based on issue, source, so did we get this person through change.org or another source, and then the date that we brought them onto our list. So we can determine when's the best time for us to grow our list, what topics resonate with our donors, and we can just keep improving on that. We send out welcome emails daily, so as soon as someone comes on our list, we definitely try to message them right away on the issue that they took action on, as well as weaving in the story of who Earthjustice is and why we're working on this issue and why it's so important. I always want to say if you can, track everything and then test to try to improve things. And I do also want to emphasize again the importance of starting early. So because we track when someone comes onto the list and we look at that over time, I was able to see that last year, just for the month of December, we saw more than 3 times the returns from folks that we got on our list in August and September than we did from folks who got on our list in November. So people need time to get to know you, learn why you're so important in the field and why they should be supporting your cause.
Thanks, Erica. And really, it's been since we've been able to help Earthjustice connect to supporters, it's been really incredible to see just how much that's been able to support their work over time. So really grateful for our ability to help, and so thank you for sharing generally about how successful you've been with your year-end campaign. We are, Erica, you mentioned testing and optimizing your campaigns ahead of that critical year-end period. So we're going to spend this last section of the webinar talking about some specifics about testing, some of the low-hanging fruit, but also some of the things that you can be doing just to make sure that your year-end campaign is fully optimized, and even that 1 or 2 percentage point difference can make a big difference in the dollar amount that you bring in over time. So Megan, do you want to talk to us a little bit about A/B testing?
I do. We are really big fans of testing here at change.org. and it's something that you'll hear us talk a lot about. In most areas of life, it's really smart to trust your gut and just go with your gut instinct. That is not the case when it comes to online fundraising. You should test everything, and chances are that the results of that test will probably surprise you. It might be counterintuitive what is more successful and brings in more money. So every email that you send out, at year-end especially, should have at least one test in it so that you know you're optimizing it before it goes out. So a way to do that and optimizing it is through A/B testing, which is when you're testing two different items. So the entire email is identical except for one thing that's different. A couple of ideas that you can test are subject lines, images, the donation button. You can change the shape, the size, the color, and see what attracts more clicks. And you can also do content tests. Maybe your list will respond really well to a one-to-one match from a board member. Maybe a shorter deadline performs better than a long-term deadline. Those are things that you won't know, and every list is different. So you won't know until you test it with your particular list. So one way to implement that, if you're thinking this sounds really difficult, is to think about your list in 3 different chunks. So say you have 2 subject lines that you want to test. One is short and one is long. Send out the short subject line to 10% of your list and the long subject line to 10% of your list. Wait a couple of hours until you have statistical significance and you can see which one performs better, and then send the winner out to 80% of the rest of your list. That way you know that at least you're getting the higher click-through rate, and chances are that the subject line that performs better is probably going to surprise you. So I know Earthjustice has a really smart strategy in terms of testing. So Erica, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. So I personally believe the more that we can optimize our emails and landing pages, the better. It's the less solicitations you need to send your supporters. And it's just better overall. It helps people convert to donors a lot easier. So in order to stay focused on our testing, we keep a messaging dashboard where everyone on our team captures ideas for tests. No idea is too small. We just, as we hear of things to test or we think of things, we just include it into this dashboard. And then quarterly we sit down and prioritize what to test that quarter, and we put it into a list. So what should we test first, second, third? So that way our goal is that we have at least one test running on our website, on our donation and action forms, on our emails, and if we have high enough volume for statistical significance in our welcome series. And I will talk about some of our testing examples so you can see what I mean. So this is an example that I mentioned earlier about our homepage hijack. It's really a website hijack. The first time someone goes to the website, once it's live, they get this pop-up, which is a call to action to have someone donate. This is an example from year-end last year. Because of the volume that we get at year-end, we're able to test a few different options, and I'll share 2 of them with you. One of the tests was just a straight image test, so everything was the same except one image was a wolf and one was a whale, and we tested into the wolf with 99% statistical significance, and our success metric on both of these was conversion rates. The second test was, if you look at the buttons on the hijack ads, one says Donate Now and one says Save the Wild. And we tested that as well. And Donate Now won with 95% statistical significance, so we rolled that out for the rest of the year. Our theory behind that was a lot of people who come to our website at year-end are there to give. So just the easier it was for them to donate, the better. Here is our donation pages. So we just launched a new website. So we weren't as focused last year on optimizing the website itself, since we weren't going to keep that website for too much longer. So we spent a lot of time optimizing our donation forms leading up to year-end. On the left-hand side is where we started before we started testing, and on the right-hand side is where we are today. Some of the things that we looked into were the call to action at the top, so the title, what the columns of asks, the bullets in the description of what we do, images. We tested where we have the verifiers on the form, the call to action, so should we continue with donate now as the button. We tested button color. There's just a bunch of tests that we did to improve it, and we're continuing to improve it. And just an example on, just a side note on tests, if we run a test that doesn't have statistical significance, we move on. So we don't try to retest too often. We just move on to try to get the most bang for our buck, because it does take some time to test into different variations. And then another test that we did related to the acquisition that we shared earlier was we did an acquisition on change.org related to our Arctic work. And because of the volume on that, we were able to do some tests with the welcome series. Usually we don't have enough volume to really get statistical significance, but this time we did, so we were like, let's jump on it. The first thing that we did was subject line for the email. And our success metric was open rate, but we also looked at how many people took action in this email, since the next call to action is an action in our first welcome. And the subject line we used to have was next steps to protect the Arctic. So it used the title of the advocacy, what they took action on change.org. The second one was thank you for protecting the Arctic, and the third option that we tried was just Arctic. And pretty quickly, the one-word subject line won for us with 99% statistical significance. So now we move forward. We've tested it one other time on another welcome series, and we got the same result. So I would try that if you haven't already. And yeah.
Great, I love that. And the thing that's so interesting about that too, it doesn't mean that one-word subject lines are the way to go for all of your emails for every nonprofit. It definitely has to do with each individual list. So these are really great examples to be testing and see how your list responds to those different variables as well. Yeah, cool. So let's talk a little bit about when you're sending your emails, just making sure that they're optimized. So there's two things we're going to talk about here. The first is whether or not they're responsive. So that's definitely a buzzword in the nonprofit technology community these days. And what that means is basically your email can be seen in a variety of platforms with the same template. So it does require a new template, and it requires a little bit of coding know-how. But once you do get that new template in, a couple of tips are just to make sure you're keeping your email short so that it is readable across a variety of devices. And when you do have that snazzy new responsive email template, don't have a clunky landing page. Make sure that it matches with that great user experience so that people kind of have the same thread that goes between the email when they click through and they see the landing page matches that. More importantly, if you aren't ready to go full responsive yet, think about whether your emails are mobile friendly. So actually half of all emails today are open on a mobile device, whether that's a phone or a tablet. That's 50%, and if you are losing out on 50% of your opens, then that's not a great way to start your fundraising campaign. A couple of tips just to keep them readable. Make sure that you aren't going super heavy on images. A lot of older newsletter templates might have a lot of images, and they'll take a long time to load on mobile devices. So make sure that you're choosing just one image and go with that. And also testing. Again, I know we've said this many times in the last 45 minutes, but you want to make sure that you're testing across different devices so that it's readable no matter where someone is looking at the email. Because something that might come across really clear on an iPhone might look completely different on an Android. And again, you won't know until you test. So as you're thinking about not only optimizing the content of your emails, you also want to make sure that they are readable for your audience and that you're going to where your audience is and giving them the resources they need to connect with you. So I think that just about wraps it up, so I'll toss it back over to Lars.
Thanks, Megan, and thank you, Erica. Really wonderful tips and thoughts about how to optimize for your year-end campaign. We've got plenty of time for questions now. There's some great questions that have come in, so we're going to turn our attention to those questions. Before we do, if you have to leave, I just want to remind you that we will be sharing this webinar with you via email after the webinar wraps up today. If you want to learn more about how we can help your organization connect with the right supporters, please feel free to visit us at change.org/organizations. We're also on the social web at change.org, where we've been tweeting at today. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/change.org. And finally, if you have any specific questions for me, or if you'd like to learn more about our sponsored campaigns and how you can connect with highly targeted, highly qualified new supporters via email or now phone, feel free to email me at lawrence@change.org. So, turning our attention to some questions, there was a question that came up about the website hijack, and just a clarification question really for you, Erica. Seven asks, were there 4 tests or 2 tests on the website hijack? Otherwise, wouldn't the donate button be a confounding variable? And then can you get into more specifics about how many different variations you had of the website hijack when you were testing?
Yeah, so that slide was a little confusing. We actually did, I just put both tests in just to share it with that slide. But the first test we did was both of the images had donate now. So that was our first test. So here we are. And I just put Save the Wild on the whale version just so you can see the different variations. So that was a little confusing. But we had everything the same except for the images was our first test. It was a straight A/B test. And then once we tested into the image, then within the wolf image, we ended up doing Save the Wild versus Donate Now as the button. So you're right. If you had different variables, you'd have to do 4 different variations, which would take longer to test into. So we did one at a time.
Great. Thanks for clarifying that, Erica. And another question from Nellie about the end-of-year email series, the donation asks that you send out. You mentioned you recommend sending 3 to 7 emails in December, and Nellie asked how you can avoid appearing spammy and losing subscribers. And her idea was that sending multiple emails within a short period of time would flag her organization as a spammer. So what's been your experience in the last couple of years as far as sending multiple emails within a short period of time?
So we've actually had, I think there are 2 parts to it. The first question was, do you appear spammy to the individual? And during year-end, everyone's sending out fundraising asks. It's just all over the place. So if you don't send an ask, you're getting lost in that shuffle. So you want to be top of mind with your donors. You want to be there, and your email should be in front of them when they're looking to give. So I think, especially during this time, you definitely want to send out more messages. The second question was about deliverability, which I know a lot of us are having trouble with the last few years. And it doesn't matter how often you send, but who you send to, we found about deliverability. So are you sending it to people who haven't done anything with your haven't engaged with you in the last few years? That's going to make a bigger difference than the amount that you send. If people are engaging with your messages, you will not be considered spam by an email service.
Gotcha. That's helpful. And following up on those end-of-year emails and the multiple emails you send at the end of the year, Sarah asks, for those emails, does the content vary, and can you give an example of how it might vary?
The content does not vary. So I included 2 examples in there that you can look through, and I'm happy to send you them as well if you reach out to me. But the story is exactly the same. So within that series, it's definitely one thread. But we will change who it comes from. Like maybe our president will have a different angle to the story than someone who's working in litigation. But it's the same story throughout the series. It gets shorter as it comes to year end because it's just, they've already heard the story, you're just touching on the main points. But it definitely is the same theme woven throughout that whole period.
Gotcha. Going back to the testing part of the webinar, Terry asks what percentage of your overall list should be used in the A/B test. Megan, do you have thoughts about generally how much you should be doing, how you split your list for A/B testing?
Yeah, definitely. When I was working at IAVA, we used the rule of 10-10-80. So you send out one variable to 10% and the next variable to another 10%, wait until you get results, and then send whichever converts higher to the remaining 80% of your list. And that's just a really easy rule of thumb to remember. It takes a little bit of extra time, but in that extra time where you're waiting to see which one converts better, ultimately down the road you are bringing in more money or whatever the goal is of that email because you know you're going to get more open rates if it's a subject line, for example.
As a follow-up to that, when Earthjustice had a much smaller email list, we weren't able to do 10-10-80s to get significance. So we would try to do tests. Maybe we had to do 50-50 tests at that time, and then it would influence how we did the next message. So you have to look at your list size. So if you have a really small list, you might only be able to do one of those tests per message. You have to have a much larger list to do 10-10-80, but even if it can inform future subject lines or messages, it's worth it.
That's a great point, Erica. And Natalie asked about what qualifies as statistical significance, and especially within the context of list size. So what you're saying is that you need to have a certain size list to have a big enough 10% that will show statistical significance, right?
Yeah, and it depends on what metric you're measuring. So if you're measuring open rates, it's a lot easier to get, depending on how it's skewed between the two subject lines or the from address or anything like that, it tends to be easier to get statistical significance than if you're measuring donation rates. So probably the easiest one to start testing is subject lines and open rates or action rates, and then donation, if you're actually looking at how many people convert into donors, that's a lot harder to test. So maybe you can only do, we tend to do tests for those that will influence future asks. But it definitely depends on what metric you're measuring. We use a calculator that I can send people if they want, where we put in, it's just a rough calculator that helps you determine statistical significance.
Thanks, Erica. I've got two questions here that I really want to get to. The first is from my good friend and yours, Matt Fender, at BSpace. He asks a question about the Arctic one-word subject test. Any idea whether it's the shortness or if that's more of the preview test that shows up in the email inboxes? So were you aware of any other variables aside from the subject line that could have influenced that specific success rate?
Everything was sent, well, that's a good point, but everything was sent to the same group of people at the same time. So we actually came up with the idea just based on what you guys send your members. And we're like, these people are coming from change. What are they used to seeing? What are they used to responding to? So that's how we got that idea. But yeah, it could be just because it's shorter. We haven't always tested into that with our members, but with this particular welcome series and with Change.org welcome series, we did test into it.
Yeah, always tricky as far as interpreting results. That's why you need to make sure that you're working solely on one variable. The other question I wanted to hear from you about, Erica, was Julie asked how long it takes Earthjustice on average to turn a new email recruit into a donor.
Wow, that's a really hard one. I feel like I get that question internally a lot as well, and it's just really all over the board. I know some people convert right away. Some people don't do anything with us for a few years, and then they all of a sudden make a gift. So it's really all over the board. It's hard to know because someone's on your online list, you can reach out to them multiple times. In the mail acquisition, you have one chance to convert someone. Online, you can communicate with this person and engage with this individual over years. So it's still, it depends on what year I'm looking at acquisition. So I don't have a really good answer for you. I know people tend to be really engaged early on in our relationship, and our goal is to keep them engaged with us, but I can't give you like an average time. Maybe you guys know more, I don't know.
Megan, anything to add on that as far as what we've seen for other clients of ours?
Yeah, I'd say that among our clients, on average, we'd see donations made after about 6 to 12 months, and oftentimes full ROI is reached between like 18 and 24 months. So it definitely takes a little bit of time, and it also takes a lot of work too, because you want to be working them up that ladder of engagement from that very first touch when you send that first welcome email. But it definitely varies across organizations.
Erica, there's a couple questions about which tools you use at Earthjustice for both CRM and sending emails. Care to share with folks who are curious about your IT infrastructure, if you will?
Yeah, so we use, for our eCRM, we use Blackbaud's Luminate, which is formerly Convio, and we've been on that platform for years. And then our main database is Blackbaud's Enterprise database. People are always curious, and I think it's good to share what's been working for you and where you've seen your success. All right, so last question here. It's an interesting one, and it ties into the year-end sort of donation kind of holiday season giving mode, and that's about tax donations. How much do you talk about tax donations or tax-free donations in your year-end appeals, Erica? Do you talk about that at all? Yeah, include it. We just include it within the ask. We'll say your tax-deductible gift. I would include it, especially the last few messages that you send out. Make sure it's in there at least once in the beginning, but definitely include it. Yeah. Great, and we'll wrap up with one more question here. Some folks are interested in other resources for storytelling. So, Megan, do you have thoughts on where people can go to learn more about storytelling?
Yeah, definitely. It's really a hot topic in the nonprofit community these days. So I've seen some really great posts on blogs like Beth Cantor's blog and that sort of thing. But I'd also recommend just looking at change.org too and taking a look at some of the campaigns that we feature on our homepage and sort of reading through those stories. They're often incredibly compelling, hence the victory that's featured on the homepage. And they can really give you some tips on how to be framing your issue in a way that helps people connect with the work that you're doing on an emotional basis.
Excellent. And just so folks know, the resource that Megan recommended is Beth Cantor and her blog. I'll type in that right now. Beth Cantor. Google Beth Cantor and you'll find her. She's very findable and has a lot of great resources about all kinds of stuff related to the nonprofit world. Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour. It's been about 60 minutes of year-end fundraising fun. So thank you all for listening in and sharing your questions, sharing with us some conversation about how we can be thinking about year-end fundraising now. Erica, thank you for sharing your incredible expertise and opening the door to what happens at Earthjustice over the summer to get ready for December. Thank you. I look forward to seeing everyone's campaigns at the year end. It should be exciting. So thank you. Yeah, it's always fun to see what nonprofits put together. It's as you mentioned, things get fast and furious in December. Emails flying and all kinds of stuff happening. So I totally agree with you. And Megan, thank you for joining me once again.
Thank you, Lawrence. Always a pleasure.
Great. Everyone, I hope to see you online sometime soon. Thanks for joining us, and we'll follow up once this webinar wraps up with a link to the video so you can review and share with your colleagues. Really appreciate your time, and talk to you soon. Have a great day.